But being in Germany, for me, I did not realize what had happened. I was at first in a place called Erlangen, but what really counted was the 3 years in Oberammergau, which was a very tiny town, and the place where the Passion Play is held every 10 years, except for during the war period. There was no Passion Play in 1940. There had been one in 1934, which recognized the 300th anniversary. But all this I didn't know. But what I did know, I was living in a very special town because we were there from 1949 to 1952. And by 1949, every man, woman, and child had grown their hair, the men their beards. They did not cut their hair. They were all the villagers were in that play or taking part in some aspect of it. It was their livelihood. And our military actually lent them the money to be able to do the play in 1950. And it was a beautiful little town, never bombed, unlike Munich, where I visited it's close by Munich, and I visited many times with my mother and her friends to buy antiques, all bombed out. I mean, so as a child, I knew what it looked like for a town to be bombed out. But Oberammergau was absolutely pristine and like it had been for years and years and years. But I learned later, much later, that there had been a Jew there in the 30s and then again after the war. And my understanding of Oberammergau came about only in 2000. And I happened to see a book review in the New York Times on this book, which is by James Shapiro, and it's called Oberammergau, and the subtitle is The Troubling Story of the World's Most Famous Passion Play. And the whole history of the Passion Play is given by a man who researched what was happening with American organizations who were trying to change the anti-Semitism in that play. Now, that didn't happen until probably 1960s. I saw the play in 1950. I hated being there. I loved theater. My father and mother, why they took me, I guess, is because it was a cultural experience in Oberammergau that one should not miss. It's an all-day play, all day.
7 hours.
You go off to eat lunch. So I guess we came home to have lunch, but I was not going to go back, and I didn't go back. And I now have transformed this whole experience into a fiction, which does include a little Jewish American child. And the reason for that is that I discovered in this book that this man, Peter Max Meyer, had lived in Oberammergau during the 30s as a convert to Catholicism. He was a musician and he taught piano. And he apparently was attacked on Kristallnacht by a group of young people, one of whom, it is believed, became the Jesus of the 1950 Passion Play that I saw. Who had any idea of any of this until we read this book, Oberammergau? And suddenly I knew that I had to use this information and use my experience in Oberammergau to write a novel, because this had already been written. It didn't need to be written in the form of a factual book, but in fact could be more accessible to many more people through a novel. This book is fascinating.
A Rabbi's Impressions of the Oberammergau Passion Play.
By Rabbi Joseph Krauskopf, a very well-known, in his day, Reform Jewish rabbi who went to the Oberammergau Passion Play in 1900 and was so astounded by how dangerous it was for Jews that he wrote this whole lecture series, which was then published in this book, about what he had experienced there. And he predicted, in many ways, he predicted the Holocaust. And so he helped in my research of the history of Oberammergau. His book is extraordinarily important because he lived during that few days that he was there for the Passion Play, right in the home of one of the people who played in the show. Of course, almost everybody did, but I think he stayed in the house of Judas, and that was a very difficult role to play because he was the only one who was truly seen as a Jew in the play, even though all of the disciples and Jesus himself were Jews. In the play, you hardly would know that. You would hardly know that. You'd have to know your history to really understand that. And this character who played Judas said he would not want his son to play the part because people hated him. See, tourists would see you afterwards because you lived in the town, and they'd point to him and spit on him because he was Judas. And if they ran across the person who played Jesus, they would kiss his hand. They were really viewed by the people who came to the town as the real figures. And that is the power of theater.